If a brand is trying to sell you electrolytes, that you should be waking up and drinking every morning, every day, and that's quite a strong electrolyte drink, I think you should have a few questions to them.
I think the rule of thumb for us when we're on these sort of multi-stage events is real food as much as possible, and then turn to gels, to powders, etc. when you need to.
Took the lid off, poured it over my head, and it was the stickiest, most horrible thing ever. And I poured the whole bottle over me. I was in hell.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Where We Ride podcast. I'm your host, Lee Bibbering. Joining me as ever is Georgia Bullard, ex-pro and now cycling travel expert with Love Velo. Georgia, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Lee. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm very excited. Today's episode is all about nutrition and hydration, and I feel that you are going to have a little bit of expert insight being an ex-professional rider. Is that right?
I would like to think I've sort of
Don't be coy.
I've come full circle in my nutrition and learning over the years. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting. When you say you've come full circle, when you were riding as a pro, was your nutrition hydration dictated to you?
Pretty much so. And I think so I was racing full time and professionally for 4 or 5 years. And in that time, things changed massively.
How do you mean?
They're constantly changing still. So, just there's always a new fueling strategy. There's always sort of something, a new science, something that you can be doing better. And these sort of lessons are always coming out, and science is evolving. So, when I first started, as a junior, it was, just eat a load of pasta the night before.
Was it as basic as that, really?
Have a gel during your race, and especially you're young as well. It was sort of, my mum and dad were my nutritionists when I was racing. Like it was just, my mum would feed me up and send me on my way. And then, I got into higher level and more serious sort of side of racing. And then you get coaches and nutritionists involved, and it just blows it wide open and changes things.
And when you had those coaches and nutritionists, were they dictating your diet, or were they giving you some kind of leniency as to what you ate?
I think a good nutritionist, the best people that I've worked with and been advised by, that it's more of a guidance rather than a eat this, eat that, eat this.
Okay.
Because you've got to enjoy things, you've got to enjoy life as well, and nobody can just eat the same things each day. There's got to be a happy medium and strike a balance. But I would say the key to being a good bike rider nowadays is fueling.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say cycling now is who can eat the most and is an eating race. And I do think there is some truth. There is some truth in that, because it's all, and everything you read now is just carbs, carbs, carbs.
Right.
The more carbs you eat, the better. You'll see the pros nowadays that they're calculating to sort of every little sort of degree how many carbs they need to eat each race, before the night before, in training. I would say it dictates racing and training a lot now.
Well, that's interesting, because today, as you know, we've got two guests, but they sit very differently, but almost complementary ends of kind of the nutrition perspective. And when you talk about enjoying your food, as an absolute amateur, I very much enjoy my food. I do want to be able to perform well on a bike when I'm riding, but probably more importantly for me is taste. So I think today will be really interesting, because we've got Lindsey Hunt from Precision Fuel and Hydration. So he is the man behind the science, I think.
Agreed.
I would agree. You would agree. But we also have Hayden Groves, who's a former National Chef of the Year. So, and also a pretty incredible bike rider. And I think he'll be able to give us a little bit of an insight into what it takes to ride your bike at a good level. He's completed the Tour 21. I think he's done it 7 times, which is a huge amount of cycling. But I'm hoping he might be able to give us a little bit of insight about maybe fueling, but ensuring that the taste remains and still having foods that you enjoy.
Agreed. Life is too short.
Life's too short.
Enjoy your food.
I couldn't agree more, Georgia. Talk to me about your career and how kind of nutrition changed depending on the team you were riding for.
Yeah, so I spent a year riding for a Spanish team in 2021, so a little while ago now, and I'd say nutrition and science has really evolved since then. I'll hold my hands up and be honest. It was a very sort of old school setup, very sort of European, Mediterranean, Spanish. You must be light, you must be skinny to be the best cyclist.
And that's just because the lighter you are, the quicker you're up the climb.
In theory, yes. However, any sort of science you read nowadays, being strong and being fueled is way more important. And from my own learning, I found that as well. I climbed better at 64 kilos than I did at 59.
Is that right?
Because I had more power.
Yeah.
But it took a while for me to realise that and to understand that. And I think even coaches back then when I was riding in Spain, it wasn't fully understand. They were sort of, I hate to say it, a little bit set in ways about, you know, you go back to like Lance Armstrong era, I hate to say it, you know, that's all be light, be, you know, be as
fast as you can be up a climb.
Yeah, exactly. But now it very much is being strong, being fueled, and having those resources to actually get you around a race rather than just being light.
And how did you learn that? Was that something that a particular team sort of, I don't know, it was like a pearl of wisdom that they dropped on you when you were, I don't know, 19, 20, or was it just something that you learned as you rode?
So that year in 2021, like, it was very much focused on diet and having a really like restricted, better diet, like we said, being as light as you can to race. And then I moved to a British team, and I gained a bit of control back. I would say, not that I was controlled before. It was just a lot of guidance, and I was very new in my career. That was sort of my first.
And you're a young female in the sport. I imagine it's hard to stand up to I don't know, an old male coach who seems to know everything there is to know about cycling nutrition.
Exactly. I was 20 and just moved to Spain on my first sort of pro contract, and I was going to do whatever I was told to. But then as I got older, I sort of worked out what works for me. And what works for me was being fueled and being strong. Especially, you know, you have to fuel accordingly to each race and what you're going to be doing. If you're in a rest block, you don't need to be carb loading every day. But then you might think, and this is where nutritionists come in a little bit more, and, you know, I guess hopefully we'll be able to tell us a bit more. But if you know you've got a really big month coming up, a big week coming up, a big session the next day, it's how do you fuel for that? And it's more future-proofing your fueling.
Is that right? So you're planning in advance? I
would say so, for sure. Rather than, oh, what am I doing this afternoon? I'll have a bowl of pasta now. Yeah. It's always the next day, the next session, the next week you're thinking about. And that helped me massively. And I think anyone can actually apply that, whether you're just riding socially, you're training for an event, or you are racing, whatever it might be. I think you can apply that really well. But also, like we said, it is about, you have got to eat every single day. So finding things that, you know, you actually do want to eat. When you're at a stage race as well, that's when it's really hard.
Well, how does that work?
That's how I found it.
Are you being brought food? Are you cooking yourself? Are you going to the local supermarket and just, I don't know, buying some eggs and bread?
So we were very fortunate, you know, racing at sort of continental level. When you're at a stage race, you're at a hotel each day. You get up, have breakfast within the hotel. They put on a breakfast buffet or something. The bigger teams will have their own chefs, their own caterers and things. We'd have soigneurs and things that would make us porridge. Then we'd go to the race, come back. And you looked after. Yeah. So there's a rice box waiting for you when you get back to the car. Okay. And then you go to dinner that night. That's when it gets hard. You're just shoveling rice down you, and trying to fuel as much as you can. And it gets monotonous.
I can imagine.
It does. And sometimes, you know, your favourite dinner in the world, you don't want to eat. It's really hard, especially when you've just absolutely, you know, destroyed yourself for 3 hours on a bike. The last thing you want to do is sit down, you know, and stomach a bowl of pasta or rice or something. It gets pretty tough, I would say.
It's interesting you say that, because even as a complete and utter amateur, I'm really just interested in, I want to fuel, but I want to make sure the food's tasty. I can't even imagine what it must be like having the same meal over and over again. And I guess that's one of the reasons I think we wanted to, the two of us, to not just have Lindsey to come on just to talk about the science, but also to have Hayden to give a bit of an opposite view, for a chef's, literally the man with the chef's hat on, to give us a kind of a view on how we fuel, how it's appropriate to fuel before a club ride or a laps in Regent's Park or Richmond Park or whatever you're going to do, but also ensure that the taste is there, that you're enjoying your food, and maybe get a couple little bit of insights into a bit of meal prep.
Agreed. And any recipe recommendations?
Indeed, we have to ask him for recipe recommendations.
100%.
So joining us now, we've got two guests who sit at completely different, but I would hope complementary ends of the nutrition spectrum. First up, we have Lindsey Hunt from Precision Fuel and Hydration, who specialise in personalised fueling and hydration strategies from everyone from World Tour pros to everyday riders. Thanks for joining us today, Lindsey. Nice to see you.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And alongside Lindsey, we've got Hayden Groves, former National Chef of the Year, someone who said he was a wannabe pro before a life at the stove beckoned. He also happens to have completed the Tour 21 7 times, so knows a little bit about what he's talking about. And he's put all of that nutrition and hydration into practice in the real world. Morning, Hayden. Thanks for joining us.
Even afternoon. How are we doing?
Oh, so we flicked over into the afternoon. You're absolutely right.
It's been a long day for you.
It's been a long day. It's always never a long day, actually, when we're doing this podcast. Right. We've got, Georgia and I were sort of talking before you guys joined. We've got science, we've got experience, and we've got hopefully good food all in one place. And we were talking about nutrition and hydration in cycling. Georgia's an ex-pro, and we were talking about her experiences. But it is one of the most confusing areas. Everyone seems to have an opinion. Everyone's got a system. And half of them, I would say, contradict each other. So, Lindsey, I guess the first question really is for you. I feel like you're going to tell me a trusty bowl of pasta the night before a ride is not what I should be doing?
It can be. If you're looking for performance, there might be better meals to have. But certainly if you're in it for a bit of both, enjoyment and performance, pasta's not a bad option.
Right, okay. Oh, the podcast ended then.
My work here is done as well, because there's a myriad of pasta sauces. But
well, National Chef of the Year, you've got to tell us what's the recipe then for the best pasta dish before you cycle?
Oh, well, it can be something as simple as some olive oil, some anchovies, some garlic, etc., or it can be as robust as a wild boar rigatoni. You know what I mean? Depends on how much time and effort you want to put in. But I'm with you guys that a simple bowl of pasta is probably the go-to for the majority of our audience, shall we say.
Okay.
It's just what you put with it, you know what I mean?
So what's the biggest myths that you see around sort of fueling?
Probably one of the biggest things is age groupers needing really, really high amounts of carbohydrate at the moment. So certainly at the top end of the field, you start to see that in the Tour de France, and those guys and girls are burning really high amounts of carbohydrates during that activity. And so they kind of need to fuel a really high amount. But depending on your fitness level, you might be able to get away with a bit less and be healthier for it.
Georgia, funnily enough, was talking about that before you guys came on air. She said the tour's almost like an eating competition.
Yeah, definitely. So these guys are burning so many thousands of calories per day that simply not fueling enough on the bike means that they'll get in a hole being off the bike.
Right.
And so they'll just get into, they'll go downhill across the tour if they don't eat enough during each stage.
Right. So the science behind it is fueling, but you're fueling whilst you're riding as well?
Yeah, definitely. So if you're, consuming 120 grams per hour, let's say as a tour rider, as a lot of them would do, that goes a decent way to provide some of the calories that they'll need just for the entire day. They might be burning 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 calories across that day.
Wow. And
so if they didn't eat anything during that stage, or they ate much less, then they'd have to eat much more after the stage. And suddenly that becomes quite tricky to get all of that food in each day.
But presumably they're not replenishing the 8,000 calories that they're burning whilst they're riding.
No, of course not. But the more you can get in during that stage, the less you kind of need to eat after and pack it in when you're not riding the bike.
So it's really just a numbers game. It's replace the lost fuel, replace the lost hydration, and just ensure that you're ready for the following day.
Exactly right.
And Hayden, just when you were doing the Tour 21, is that how you approached your riding as the chef, or were you looking for something a little bit more enjoyable, a bit more?
No, I completely agree. I think no matter what speed you go, you're still, it's calories in, calories out, essentially.
Okay.
And because the majority of our riding was zone 2, zone 3, we're not trying to get a kick in the mountains up the Stelvio in the Giro d'Italia, for example, because that's, for us, it's all about just trying to maintain a steady sort of tempo. But that allows you to tap into real food and then use nutrition when you absolutely need to. So you can eat a baguette in your back pocket, a cheese and ham baguette, for example, in the morning as your second breakfast.
Yeah.
But if you were going really hard up a big mountain, you wouldn't be able to eat that kind of, you're just going to cause gastric distress.
Sure.
So I think the rule of thumb for us when we're on these sort of multi-stage events is real food as much as possible, and then turn to gels, to powders, etc. when you need to. Certainly helps with recovery for your protein powders and everything like that. But we would always urge the riders to sort of use real food as much as possible, and then turn to performance nutrition when it's a must, or when your body's under distress, like when you're climbing up a mountain like the Galibier, for example. That can be well over an hour and a half, so for some riders over 2 hours. So you can't, just to eat a banana up there is about as challenging as you could go. So you need to put something in your bidon then, and reach for a gel occasionally just to keep your carbohydrate stores lined up. But what I've seen from some of the riders that have joined us is the fact that they think they have to mirror what the pros do. So the first couple of days they're cramming gels in 1 hour into a 200k stage, and then wondering why they're sort of visiting the bathroom quite often.
That's something that I was going to say. How can, amateur social riders, how can they sort of learn from that higher level and apply it to their own? Obviously, like you said, social riders, if you're riding a sportive, you don't want to be cramming loads of gels in to get going. How can they mirror it in a way that's a little bit kinder to themselves, maybe? Is that a thing?
Well, I suppose Lindsey's the professional, but for someone that's ridden 180 grand tour stages, the way I would look at it is, just so happens I've got one of the sponsors bid on. I look at it as water in one. You can splash it down the back of your neck, over your face, whatever. It's water, clean your mouth. And then the other one, I would always put some kind of carbohydrate powder in it. So I'm always sipping carbohydrate powder in one bidon, and I've got water in the other. And then it will be a combination of maybe the odd gel here and there, certainly a caffeine, because if you can't stop for a double espresso when you need it, it's always handy to have one of those. And then sort of a combination of real food and bars, and they do, not just because Lindsey's on the call, but they're shall we say, want of a better word, they're Turkish delight style 60 gram bars are superb. You know what I mean? They're a bit of a guilty pleasure, but that the majority of riders, that will do you an hour. 60 grams of carbs and a few sips on a bidon with some powder in. That's a softer way of sort of fueling a long ride, should we say.
When you talk about the real food, that's kind of interesting. Lindsey, do the pros ever eat real food, or is it just supplements when they're riding?
Yeah, a lot of them do. So we work with the Lotto cycling team, the Lotto Intermarché cycling team it is now. And they often use real food in there. Not always during the harder stages when everyone's full gas across the whole stage, as Hayden mentioned, can be a little bit more comfortable to have mostly sport nutrition when you are going full gas. But in those easier stages, and certainly early on in those stages, the riders will have like Rice Krispie bars that the chefs and Swannies will make up for them.
It breaks the day up a little bit. If you're on a stage race,
it must be so sickening eating the gels all the time.
If you're just eating gels for 5 days holiday, it gets a bit monotonous. So when I was racing, actually, when I was over in Spain, our Swannies used to make like these little rice cakes, and then they freeze them overnight, and they put like jam and Nutella in, and that was sort of like a little pick me up mid-stage almost. It was, a nice way to break things
Break
up.
things
But
up, yeah.
you're not just eating another gel. The only thing was, in the height of summer, they'd melt.
Oh,
So, and it was like a mission to
I'm
you'd
not
have
sure
to
I want that.
get it in your mouth in one hit. But yeah, I would 100% agree from an enjoyment point of view.
And I suppose it's
And let's
probably
not forget the red ambulance, the mini can of Coca-Cola.
The red
I mean, it's
ambulance.
still tradition, isn't it?
Oh, is that what it's called?
The red
The red ambulance.
Yeah,
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
In terms of the pros, and again, Lindsey, this might be a more relevant question for you, but do you see any kind of myths still within the pros and the pro teams, or are they just completely dictated to by scientific evidence from their team?
I think fueling and hydration is coming a long way for the pros. There's probably a few teams that aren't up to the latest there in terms of individualizing things for the riders as much as they might need in terms of sodium and or fueling as well. But a lot of the teams are getting the latest information, and they have very good scientists and professionals working for them that are running the show pretty well there. There might be some technical holdbacks in certain teams based on the equipment they're using, but that's sort of outside my realm.
I was also reading an interesting article about the fact that because the nutrition is so highly scientific and specified, that a lot of these not just the tour riders, but a lot of just professional sports people are having an absolute nightmare with dental issues because of the amount of sugar contained in some of the gels and the powders. I guess for your average club rider or your amateur rider, Hayden, I mean, this might be a question for you. When people are trying to eat clean and they're trying to ensure their meals aren't too complex and they're not trying to consume too much sugar, and they're doing, I don't know, a club ride of 80, 100K on a weekend, is there anything that you can advise? What's the best kind of foods to be eating for that so that you're still eating clean and you're not sort of stuffing your body full of sugar?
Well, I mean, you've got sugar, but it will just come from different sources, shall we say. I mean, to me, there's a simple product that we all use, which is like a banana.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's still got fructose in it, although you think it's healthy, and it's still got sugars. It's still got fructose in there. And I think if anything, whatever you eat, just remember, when you get back, just to sort of give your teeth a brush. Really, probably is the best thing you can do. Whether you're doing 200K ride as a pro or you're doing an 80K cafe ride, and you've been, even like we said, a can of Coke in your back pocket, handed up in mid-race, bit of a red ambulance, just get on the bus and brush your teeth, or when you get home, don't wait till the evening. I mean, it's things like that. But essentially, I would say. Yeah,
nutrition products, they've come on a long way in the last sort of...
Am I being too reductive by just assuming they're full of sugar?
No, I think Lindsey's probably our guy to ask here. But I think gels and carb mix has improved, am I right in saying, in sort of the last 10 to 15 years?
In terms of the actual products within them, most of them are made from maltodextrin, which is essentially lots of glucose molecules bound together. And the other part is usually fructose. Both of these are considered sugars in most people's minds, but are not actually sugar. So sugar is sucrose, which is a different type of carbohydrate, which typically has a slightly bigger impact on dental health than maltodextrin and fructose as sugars. And that's probably why, what's one of the reasons why we're starting to see these products being used, or these components being used in these products more so than sucrose. And sucrose, from memory, I think that's what's in Coca-Cola, or it could be fructose. Actually, Hayden might be able to say for sure there. But a lot of the problems but a lot of the problems we see for dental health is actually on really highly acidic products. So Coca-Cola is one of those. And it's not always, it's obviously related to sugar and sucrose, but it's not just that as a problem. And so that's why you see really bad dental outcomes with people that drink 7-Up and Coca-Cola and all the rest of it.
There's a lot on the market nowadays, and there's a lot of, everywhere you read, magazines and things, there's a lot of talk of electrolytes and sodium and replenishing stores, not just for athletes, for everyday people. How much of a factor are electrolytes in our life, would you say, Lindsey?
It's definitely an interesting topic topic at the moment. There seems to be a lot of, let's say, trendy brands popping up selling you
Yeah.
a lot of high strength electrolytes.
There's a lot
Um,
of, sorry, in our office, there's electrolyte chat every day. We had to bring in a jar you had to put a pound in every time you said the word electrolyte because it got out of control. How much of a thing actually is it?
It's incredibly important when you're exercising for a long time and sweating a lot.
Mhm.
That's probably the main thing to think about here. So if a brand is trying to sell you electrolytes that you should be waking up and drinking every morning, every day, and that's quite a strong electrolyte drink, I think you should have a few questions to them. Most people, unless you're exercising for more than 60 minutes a day, probably don't need very many electrolytes because we get this from food a lot of the time. It's only when we're exercising for 90 minutes plus every day, sweating a lot, losing a lot of electrolytes in our sweat, that's kind of when we start to really see the benefits from having enough electrolytes during exercise, as well as kind of pre and post, or when you're chasing really high performance in short duration exercise, and you can benefit from having a high dose of electrolytes pre-exercise. It's called hyperhydration, but this is not something that the average person needs to worry about.
Well, you talk about the average person. That's interesting to me because I assumed the average person wouldn't ever be getting a sweat test. But from what I read, especially from Precision, that's something that is almost available to your everyday rider. And it's pretty much something that can give you quite a lot of information about how you ride and how you need to fuel.
Definitely. So the sweat test itself is a measurement of your sweat sodium concentration. And so there's a massive range, or the reason we kind of have the sweat test is because there's a massive range in how much you as a person, as an individual loses in that sweat. So, you could be as low as 200 milligrams per liter and as high as, over 2,000 milligrams per liter. That's like a massive difference in person to person salt loss. And so the hydration strategies that you might need during exercise, if you are doing more than 60 minutes a day, would vary dramatically if you're a very low salty sweater or a very high salty sweater. And so if you go to the extremes and maybe you're doing Majorca 312 and riding for 10 hours plus in 30-degree heat, then definitely you're going to need to get the right amount of sodium back in. But if you're doing 60 minutes around the park, you'll probably be just fine with some water.
Okay.
But another one, just to add a bit of context on there, is if you're on the trainer, indoor trainer, you really sweat.
Yeah,
so
'cause of the
that's
heat,
probably, even though an hour workout on the trainer is probably worth to drop a salt tablet or something in your bid on.
Yeah. And it's probably worth clarifying. I say 60 minutes is kind of this threshold where I say it's not necessary. And that's from like a performance and symptoms of dehydration point of view. Certainly you can get away with it during that session to not have anything. But as Hayden says, it's not harmful to. It's just we don't try and recommend that people do that out of necessity because there's no evidence for like performance within that session that it helps. And that's kind of the lens that we use when talking about sodium replacement recommendations, as to not over recommend.
I'll take that back to the office.
Yep. So we have the science and we have a chef, but I'm going to wonder what they think of the story that you're about to tell us from the marathoner last year.
It's a famous story here at Love Velo, yes. So we have our feed stop at 55k. We've got the tent. We have lots of gels, actually lots of precision hydration gels and chews.
Good plug.
Which went down very, very well, I must admit. We even had to stop the staff eating them. Yeah, lots of different fuel, like ways to fuel at the stop, cans of Coke and things. People pull in, put their bike down, fill the bottles up, grab a few gels, and then they're on the way. One gentleman pulled in, set his bike down, and reached into his back pocket and grabbed a clear sandwich bag full of pasta from last night's hotel buffet, which he had saved unrefrigerated.
And which he'd ridden within his back pocket.
Yeah, for 55k. Got it out and then started just eating it almost like toothpaste or like a gel. Yeah.
So is the question you want to ask Lindsey and Hayden, is that the way to fuel?
what on earth was that all about is what I'd like to ask. We were all sort of stood maybe a bit unkindly thinking, what on earth, and having a little giggle to ourselves. Is that as ridiculous as we think, or what do you guys make of that?
I think personally, from a food safety perspective, probably like a petri dish of sort of goodness knows what's going on in there. The sweat, the warmth from the back, the sun. You know what I mean? It's probably, that pasta's probably doubled in size from what it did at the buffet the night before. But
you must have seen in your time, Hayden, some ridiculous decisions, some ridiculous fueling decisions. That is.
Yeah, some not for general population, shall we say? But, yeah, I mean, I remember some stuff from my early days, including driven 3 hours to enter, to go and ride the national championships back in the 90s, and the night before we thought it was a good idea to have a curry.
Oh,
it's not a good idea.
No, it's not a good idea.
The rice, yeah, great carbs, but the spice, not so much.
Not so much.
There's some, yeah. We all know the Greg LeMond story from the 1986 Tour de France.
No, I don't. Enlighten us. What's that story?
Not revisited that, but well, he had some severe gastric distress, so we say, and there were scenes of him being pushed along by his Lavie Claire teammates with stuff running down his leg.
Oh, and, a little bit graphic like for the podcast.
But there was. Let's just say that I was grateful to get off my bike, shall we say, and visit the local.
Well, there was another scenario, wasn't there? I think it was Tom Dumoulin in the Giro.
Tom Dumoulin.
Yeah.
It's called having a Dumoulin.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened there?
Well, he was leading, and you just see the camera sort of pan over to him, and he stops and sets his bike down and takes his jersey off and sort of disappears down a little ditch.
He has a Paula Radcliffe moment.
Yeah, but I think he made it just in time, hopefully.
He did, but this was the Queen stage pretty much at the 2017 Giro, and I mean I remember that very well because we rode one day before the pros when we took on all 3 Grand Tours one day before the professionals. Back in 17, and
of course,
the stage went over the Mortirolo and went over the Stelvio, and in the valley between the Stelvio and the Umbrae Pass, which is the other way up the Stelvio from the Swiss side, there was a bit of banter, I think, between 2 of the team cars. Like, is Tom Dumoulin going to attack? And he goes, no, he's busting to visit the toilet, and Whitey, out of just banter, hands a toilet roll to the Sunweb team car, is the story. And I think I was great, just thought it was a bit of banter. Next scene, he's got the toilet roll and he's gone off into the long grass, shall we say. Yeah.
Listen, guys, thanks so much for joining us. But before we wrap up, we always ask our listeners if they've got any questions that they'd like to pose for our guests. And we were inundated this week. Because the podcast is powered by Love Velo, and Love Velo being a travel brand, one of the questions we were asked this week was how flights affect hydration and what this person can particularly do about it before they ride. I think they were going to Mallorca. Is there anything, Lindsey, that they should specifically be doing either before the flight, during the flight, after the flight that would help?
Yeah, so this is a situation where we wouldn't usually recommend electrolytes at rest. But in the case of flying, it can be quite helpful because you have quite a lot more water loss through respiration, through the dry air, and through the skin as well. So we tend to recommend people to have some electrolytes in their water before they fly, during the flight, and after their flight, just to help absorb that water, retain that fluid, and make sure that they don't get dehydrated across that flight. For an hour or so for a short flight, for an hour or 2, it's, less impactful. But when you're going long haul, say flying to the States or something like that, or, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours, that's when it starts to become really important to have electrolytes during to help retain that fluid. But otherwise, that's probably the biggest thing you can do to kind of stay hydrated during a flight.
Okay. Well, listen, Hayden, Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. No worries.
I do just want to say, funny thing, when you said about having one water, a bottle of water and one bottle of carb, like some water to chuck down your neck. I was racing in France years ago, and it was scorching. It was like 35 degrees, and I grabbed a bottle in the feed zone. It was really cold, and I thought, oh, fantastic.
One down the back
Carb
of your neck.
mix.
Water. I literally sat up, no hands,
Sticky afternoon.
hands off the bars, took the lid off, poured it over my head, and it was the stickiest, most horrible thing ever. And I poured the whole bottle over me. I was in hell for the next 2 hours. Yeah, I was so sticky. I had to go back to the team car to get like a bit of a shower, like to get another bottle because I was so sticky and horrible.
That's hilarious. But how did you not know that it was not water?
Double confession, I stole it from another team.
You stole it from another team. It's karma.
It must be.
I'm sorry, that's karma. You stole it from another team. You didn't know you thought it was water. It was an electrolyte, and then you poured it all over yourself.
It wasn't even electrolyte, it was carb mixing.
Oh, that's
double
even
sticky.
worse.
Yeah, I know. I learnt my lesson. I've stopped stealing bottles from other teams in the feed
I think we
zone.
probably need to leave the podcast there before you admit to any more thefts.
Desperate times call for desperate measures.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Had a little bit of science, a little bit of taste, and a little few war stories. And hope you managed to get a little bit of information about how best to fuel and hydrate, whether you're riding in the mountains, whether you're riding a sportif, or you're just a club rider. Please make sure you like and subscribe. You'll find our podcasts in wherever you normally get your podcasts, and you can contact us on Instagram, either DM us at Where We Ride Podcast, or you can email us at whereweride@lovevelo.co.uk. See you next time.
Bye-bye.